Oh,
Um, so welcome everybody to our Society for Sustainable Events very first Patio Perspectives, episode 1, looking at the big picture. We are so excited that you have joined us today and committing to learning about sustainability. We're really excited to have you. Thanks for making time. So we're gonna have an awesome conversation today with Paul Salinger and Courtney Lohmann. And I'm really excited to introduce Paul Salinger today. Sorry. Paul is the former vice president of marketing for Oracle and a past president of the Green Meeting Industry Council. At Oracle, he led the company's event sustainability initiatives from 2007 to 2020, creating an industry-leading approach to event sustainability for all of the company's global events. He's really incredible and has really paved the way for sustainability in the industry. He's recently been awarded recognition for this, which is fantastic. So working with partners and all components of the event supply chain, Paul created a collaborative environment and network of suppliers that created a legacy of best sustainability practices for the company and for communities where Oracle held events. And combined with his background in event design and production and his access to senior management, he was able to bring both a business and creative approach to how to view sustainability in the event planning and execution process. Now he's retired from corporate life, but not retired from the ongoing work on rethinking and regenerating the approach to sustainability. Paul's working on a number of projects that continue to educate, ask the hard questions, and propose new solutions within the industry. So with that, Paul, I'm really excited to hear this conversation, and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Anna, and welcome all to the first of what will hopefully be a number of episodes of Patio Perspectives. Let me just say a couple quick things about Patio Perspectives before I introduce Courtney and we get started. Patio Perspectives is going to be a combination of a written blog and these virtual events where we have conversations with thought leaders and subject matter experts around the issues and challenges that we are facing from an event sustainability perspective. And what we're trying to do is up-level the conversation some. So it won't be so much about, checklists and, kind of like how do you get started and some of those kind of things, though we may touch on some of those topics. We really want to dive into some deeper topics to help us, really advance sustainability within the event industry. So I'll start with my perspective. And my perspective, and one of the impetuses for doing these events was, have we realized and acknowledged that the big issue and the big problem that we're all tasked with is reducing our overall emissions, both individually and organizationally? There's been a lot of talk about renewal and regeneration, but are we taking the appropriate actions on a big enough scale to do our part as an industry to mitigate the effects of climate change and work towards a healthy planet with healthy people and an equitable economy? So with that, let me introduce my first guest, Courtney Lohmann. I've known Courtney, and she's been involved in the sustainability field for 9 or 10 years, going back to the Green Meeting Industry Council days. Certainly followed her work, and she's done some fantastic things. So Courtney, welcome to Patio Perspectives. And I'd like to just kind of start with, we've sort of talked about the big picture. I'd like to just kind of start with having you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing and what you're seeing from a big picture perspective in terms of where we are right now from an event sustainability standpoint in the event industry.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. First, thanks for having me on. I'm so excited to be here with you today and have this great discussion. Can't wait to hear from everyone who's joined us, and hope to really drive these issues further and further down the road. I would say where I kind of sit today, and in terms of a lot of the work that I've done, I'll level set and say that most of my work has been in the corporate space. So when we talk about the broader hospitality industry, I've really been in kind of that corporate event planning space for 20 or so years, 18 years. So that's really where a lot of my perspective comes from. And I think that since I've been talking about sustainability for 8, 9, 10 years, that it seems like we've hit this point where a lot of people are doing the low-hanging fruit, right? A lot of people have balled up the wet paper towel, they've thrown it against the wall, they've tried to see what's going to stick and how their stakeholders are going to engage with it. But they've never really digested what it means to plan in a more holistic lens around sustainability, and then how they can really redesign their events. And so I have really been having conversations more rooted in that. So even for those planners that have started to implement several different things and they're feeling really good, and they're I got rid of all my plastic bottles, and we've moved to biodegradable, and all those kinds of conversations, which are great. But then how are you really changing your entire planning process? And I think that's like a great next step for us as an industry to move forward into, versus talking about the more, like you kind of said, one-off type of things that maybe we've done already. How do we level up? How do we really make this how we plan?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, and what I've seen is that people tend to start by creating a checklist, if you will, of like, okay,
Correct.
let's eliminate bottled water. Okay, let's stop printing things. And you and I talked a little bit about kind of this idea of design thinking as a way of getting into this. So I think, one of the things that we could talk about is there a more strategic way to approach event sustainability? And is design thinking a tool or a means by which we could do that? I've certainly used design thinking in the work that I did at Oracle. I know that you've been using design thinking. Let's just talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about what design thinking is, how it might apply to road mapping or planning your sustainability strategy, and kind of how you might go about doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. My first answer is yes. I think it can absolutely help us, as we continue to go forward. For me, the design thinking process is really rooted in centering your plan around the attendee or your stakeholder. I typically use attendee, again, because I come from the corporate space, so that's the term I like to use. But you really take your attendee and you focus them in, and you start to have conversation around what is their complete experience while they're with you at the event. So the design thinking process walks you through several steps of, things like sort of brainstorming all the way through in terms of different big concepts or big ideas. I mean, you could take something like a going zero plastic for your event. What does that big idea look like? What does that start to mean? And not just mean in one piece of your event, but how would applying zero waste look like if you were doing it for every element within your event? That could be your 3-day event, your 4-day event. This could be an incentive trip. This could be a big trade show. You can apply it because you talk about how the attendee walks through each and every moment of the event and how that change is going to affect their experience. I think when you take that concept and then you kind of meld it with that, MPI came out with that strategic meeting management sort of mindset and plan many years ago. When you kind of blend those two things together, that's where I'm really seeing those aha moments for planners, especially our senior planners that are bigger strategic thinkers, and they needed something that felt like they could ground into a huge shift in how they plan. Yeah. So I kind of talked through that with them, saying, look, step back from the trying to do like a little bit of sustainability here and a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here. Stop, bring your team together, really go through the design thinking exercise, really think big picture, take your entire year of events. Maybe you end up picking just one topic and you say, look, we're going to eliminate plastic. What does that look like for 2024? How does that affect every single element within all of our events? Where do we start? How do we build on that, right? So event number 1, you may only implement one small thing, but then for event 2, 3, and 4, what is your next step? How do you build? And when you build that way, planners are so type A, it all starts to feel easy. It starts to feel simple. The planning process doesn't feel so hard. Your attendees start to engage in it. You get better at telling your story, which we could do an entire porch perspective on how to talk about your sustainability story, right? And you start to see this build up and momentum around how you're planning your event. So I guess that's where I always kind of root back into with the design thinking process.
Yeah, and I think similarly, what I would say is that not only would you talk to the planners, but I think that in a lot of ways, if you start to look at it in terms of this is the lens that we're going to use to look at sustainability. And again, if it's a particular topic like zero plastic waste, you have to bring in your designers, you have to bring in your procurement people, you have to bring in other suppliers that might be doing packaging, you have to bring in your exhibit team to start to understand where does plastic actually show up in all of the various different aspects of the event. And so I think the design thinking process allows you to kind of like bring a collaborative effort to this. And as you said, expose big ideas that aren't necessarily coming just from the planners, but are coming from other people within the supply chain and within the organization who all of a sudden get that aha moment of like, oh, I actually have a piece of this. I have a part to play in all of this. And so the design thinking process, I think, is a really great tool from a strategy perspective. And the other thing I might add, and maybe you could talk to this a little bit as well, is, when you start to talk about it as well from an attendee experience perspective, one of the ways that we started to do it was to really look at who are the attendees, what are their personas, and what are their values? What is it that they care about? How are they coming into this event? And what are the things that we can do to provide value to meet their needs? So, can you talk about that a little bit in terms of how that might fit into the design process?
Yeah, the persona piece is so it's critical. And I think even when I've had these kind of initial conversations with clients and even suppliers, a lot of times people don't seem to have the right data, and we're making a lot of assumptions around our attendees, right? So we're not fully understanding, are they going to accept going meat-free for an entire meal? You get a lot of pushback initially when you hear from a client. They say, oh, we can't do that. Our audience is so international, we can't go that far. But do you really know if you can? And so a lot of times what I do is when we get into that persona discussion, I talk about how are you communicating with the attendee? How are you gathering better information about your attendees? What questions are you asking during registration? Or how are you engaging stakeholders early that may have better data and information around those groups that are attending that can help you start to formulate a different plan so that you understand maybe where there's some ease of implementation and where you may have some, maybe a little bit more of like a rub as you try to implement something new. Then I also talk about as you're making a change. So let's say you dive in and you're going to pick one piece of it. Start that communication really early. Start that communication with every single stakeholder as early as you possibly can and be as specific as you possibly can. And then talk about how they engage with it. Hey, here's something that we're doing different this year. We're going to go ahead and do meatless meals for all of our lunches. We want to make sure that you're prepared. We will have additional items related to X, Y, and Z. The reason we're doing this is tell them the why, really help them understand the point, the purpose, and then what the impact is. I think the biggest miss is that we maybe do an event survey at the end. We maybe ask, about the sustainability elements we've implemented. We don't really end up doing a lot with that data. And the one thing no one is doing is actually sending an impact report back out to the attendee saying, here's how you made an impact. Yeah. So if you're a planner and you can, again, kind of focus yourself in on one or two things that you're implementing, but then really do it well, really pull that metric and data all the way through to the end, and then send that report out and say, because of you, we were able to have an impact of XYZ. I think that changes everything around what we're doing. And I think that relates back then to the persona, and you start to pull in more and more of what those individuals are interested in into your planning process. So it's kind of like you got to push a little maybe, and then you'll discover a little as well. And then it blends back together.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that to your point, the industry and we as, organizations have not done a great job of communicating sustainability stuff back out to our attendees. We did a lot at Oracle Open World when I was still there in terms of signage and various different things to try and tell people, why we were not using bottled water or why we were, asking them to, participate in putting trash into various different receptacles. But I don't know that we ever actually, sent back an impact report. We always did a sustainability report and exposed it publicly, but I don't know that we did a targeted campaign back to people. And I'm starting to see now that there are some conferences that are starting to create some sustainability spaces for people to come and actually talk about how they feel about sustainability, how they feel about climate change, which I think is sort of an interesting new trend that we might want to think about when it comes to, again, this big picture of like, where are we at in terms of climate change, in terms of reducing our carbon emissions, in terms of reducing our waste. And I know that you've been really focused on waste as a big component. And so I do want to talk about waste for just 1 minute, because it does actually tie into the carbon emission piece of this, whether it be, the methane that comes from landfill, or the amount of fossil fuels that get created in the production of various different components, whether that be bottled water or other plastic pieces. How do you think about waste, and how are you advising your clients around waste emissions and reduction of landfill, especially as it comes to thinking about carbon and waste as kind of an overall holistic way of reducing our overall impact?
Yeah, it's a cool and dynamic piece of the bigger puzzle. I think a lot of people, they think about their material waste, but they don't always tie it then to their carbon footprint, right? So I feel like I see a lot of planners get wrapped up in I don't know what to do about my carbon footprint. I have to fly people here. I have to put them on buses, or they have to be in this, or, whatever those kinds of constrictions are, right? And so I've been redirecting that conversation saying, yes, those things are all true. And we have massive infrastructure issues related to that. You're not going to solve that today. What can you control? What can you solve? Let's really think about your material items, because they all play into what that is. And then how do you start to kind of dynamically move those things around and prioritize what you want to keep, what you can move, how you can maybe redistribute some of your funds, how you can engage your local community in a different way. One of the things that I've really focused on is, look, you can still have, maybe it's a big decor event that you're doing. You're going to have a lot of items that are brought in. Maybe there's specialty items that are brought in. You could be doing centerpieces, you could be doing big backdrops, all types of things, right? How can you look at those items and ensure that nothing within that is going to go into a landfill? What does that look like? And what is the impact of what that would be, right? If you move away from a fresh cut floral and you're using live plants, there's a really big impact just in in and of itself. And I can't tell you in the corporate space, like the number of times my heart just breaks looking at the number of florals that'll be used in a 3 to 4 day event. Most of the time, those florals are being grown and cut in South America, and they're coming here to the US. I mean, you would talk about a carbon footprint, like it's a massive footprint when you really look at something that then sits on a table for 3 hours and is then put in the trash. So if you can rethink around what some of those things are, and then also as a secondary piece of that, engage with that local community. Really understand who your partners are in the local community, and how do you start to donate more items post-event. There's ways, especially now with like the kind of rise around like urban farming and community gardens and things like that. How can you look at utilizing different types of live plants? How can you look at then donating those items to one of those local type of community garden setups? Maybe you want to like attach it to an entire piece around helping to sustain and grow the pollinators that are within that community. So maybe you do some really cool live wildflower setups in your room. It's still an interesting way to set up your event and really bring a sense of elegance and decor that a lot of times planners need to have. It's a big awards dinner or some sort of a big celebration, but you have a much smaller impact overall when it comes to a waste and a carbon footprint. So that's just one kind of example around like how I'm trying to change that conversation.
Yeah, well, it also speaks to the opportunity to really rethink your supply chains and really think about, can we diversify our supply chains? Can we be more equitable in the communities that we're working in by working with local suppliers? So rather than, transporting flowers from South America to North America, are there local suppliers that are growing things that are appropriate to the season, to the community, to the locale that we should be using? And again, this is where you have to kind of think about, how do we bring procurement into this conversation? How do we change some of our procurement policies so that we don't have to always use big suppliers just because it's the cheapest price? If we really want to be, focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of this conversation, should we rethink the way that we think about our supply chains? And should we rethink, how we're distributing wealth in different communities? So I think it's a really great point in terms of like rethinking and re-looking at, what are the opportunities for cutting down on carbon emissions by just rethinking one aspect, rather than bringing in, whether it be food, whether it be flowers, whether it be other materials from a long distance. Are there local suppliers that we could be using so that we cut down on our transport emissions as one piece of this rethink, if you will?
Yeah, it's just a real quick comment on the diversity, equity, and inclusion part. One really cool, interesting thing that I've just seen more lately is that with the ESG mandates that are coming through in corporate America, that diversity in your supply chain piece has become a massive focus. And the corporate planner is trying to get their head wrapped around it and trying to understand what that means. But I think it's like this little glimmer of hope that it's going to finally help them push back a little bit on procurement, because they're going to say, look, do you want me to be at the absolute cheapest price at all time? Or do you want me to ensure we're hitting our diversity and supplier numbers? Because there has to be a balance to what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even a lot of corporations now, most corporations have some kind of ESG statement and or goal. Ideally, they have some goals. And so it's incumbent on us as event people to look at what the corporation is saying. And again, to your point, have that conversation with procurement. So do you care about cheapest price, or do you care about meeting the values and goals that our corporation is stating relative to carbon emissions, relative to waste, relative to DEI, whatever those may be? So I see that. We have a question in the Q&A, which I wanted to just kind of quickly address. Chris Heater says, I'm having trouble finding ways to measure what we saved in order to report back to attendees. Are there websites, companies that help calculate this? Not the impact, but the results. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Courtney, but I know that there are definitely companies out there that can come in and verify and audit your event and help you write a report. Meet Green is probably the number one company that does that. They did that for Oracle. They do it for a number of different companies. They do it for IMEX. Honeycomb Strategies out of Colorado is another one. There's a few others that are out there. I think you're even starting to get into that space yourself a little bit. The main thing that I would say is, to just start measuring what you can, and whether you look at it as an impact report or just a sustainability report, whatever you do, put together something that just says, here's what we did, here's some opportunities that we can now start to do in the future, and then make that public. The more that we can share with each other, the more that we can learn from each other. So those are just a couple of things. I don't know if you have some other thoughts on that question, Courtney.
Those are definitely my two suggestions for people to partner with. They are definitely at the top of the best list. And then I would say also, sometimes what you need more than anything is that initial self audit. And that's someplace that I've pushed a little bit as well, with places I've worked, and then with clients, is saying, look, you have to gather a baseline. I was just talking to a client who initially wanted to implement all these things for food and beverage. And I said, yeah, but do you even know where you're standing at this moment in time? Like, just get an audit of whatever it is that applies to you. Sometimes that is the most helpful thing that you can start with.
That is absolutely the right approach. I mean, you have to establish a baseline because without a baseline, you don't know where you're going next.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answered your question, Chris. If you have a follow-up question, feel free to put it in the Q&A and we'll try and address it. So let's talk a little bit about, I've just finished reading this book called This Could Be Our Future by Yancey Strickland. And in it, he talks about generational change and how it takes like 30 years for there to be generational change. And we're kind of at that tipping point within the event industry. I mean, there are people like Amy Spatrasano and Nancy Zavada from Meet Green and a few other people that literally have been doing this for almost more than 20 years for sure. And now there are people coming along, people like yourself who are, in their 40s or, 30s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding it optimistic that, there is a new generation of leaders that are kind of coming along. But I wanted to kind of get your perspective on this idea of generational change and how that might up the game in terms of event sustainability. Because what I'm seeing is that Gen Z and millennials really do care about this stuff, probably more than my generation did. And that, I'm hopeful that, some people are going to start to step into the space that have new ideas, can set more ambitious goals, can start to really push on, companies and suppliers to do more than what they've been doing and more than the basic standard that, are out there. So I'd love to just get your perspective on that.
Yeah. Excuse me. I absolutely have been seeing that. It's very interesting to sit in a client conversation, and maybe that client brings 6 or 7 different members of their team to the conversation, right? The number of times I see one of the younger people in that group really driving conversation, really asking questions, putting their hand up to say, I would love to lead this, task force or what have you. It's really fun to see that sort of energy around it.
Yeah.
I think it's, and I fall into, I'm sort of like late generation X. So I think there's quite a few of us in that space that we grew up when, as a kid, I remember the commercials on TV for this is how you recycle. So it's like, we were the first childlike generation, those later Gen X kids who started to see, oh, this should just be a part of everyday life, right? And that was a little bit different than I think of how much it was seen before. And so as you are pushing forward, there's a lot of Gen X, later Gen X that knows we should be doing things, but we're also sort of like in those positions where we have so many other things on our plate. We're trying to just drive forward, and it's almost hard to stop the train. So this breath of fresh air of those 2 other generations, and that they have a different energy, right? If you're in the events industry, there's a bit of a grind that comes with our industry. They have that energy to say, you know what, if you boss person will sign off on it, I will absolutely pick up the flag and run with this so that we can implement more. And so I kind of see this like melding of, I want to get it done, but I don't have the time or the brain space to do it. And I have all this energy, please, I'm like, I want to just bite my teeth into it and absolutely tear it apart and make it the best thing ever, right? So it's like a really kind of fun space versus where I think we've been maybe in past decades where it's a little bit more of a struggle. I think we're moving past the struggle and into a space of more energy around it.
I would even argue that, some of the younger folks might not even ask for permission to do this stuff, that they might just go rogue and start doing it on their own because they have that sort of rebellious streak in them, which I would love to see.
Yeah, me too.
Because in a lot of ways, that's what we did at Oracle. I mean, we started from the bottom up. We did not ask permission to start doing event sustainability. We just started doing it.
Yeah.
And sure, it's great if you can get senior management to write up, to sign off on it, to budget for it, to all of those things. But it's certainly possible to, as you say, champion it, evangelize for it and do it.
Yeah.
From the bottom up.
Yeah.
So I would encourage, if you've got young people in your organization that are passionate about this stuff and you want, have energy and want to do something, empower them to do it. Just
100%.
let them get going and do this stuff, because it's the only way that we're going to collectively make change is if we have more people who are active in the space and really pushing on all of us to do more.
I agree. Yeah.
Mind if I interact with another question? Sorry to cut you off, Paul, but
Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier about procurement, and I'd love if you could dig in a little bit further about how do you see that changing? What would it take for procurement departments to really start to adopt this new thinking?
Mm-hmm. Do you want to take that, Courtney, or you want me to?
I mean, I have two thoughts. I'm sure you'll be able to jump in then, Paul, as well. So kind of back to when we were talking about the design thinking process. I think when you have to talk to someone like procurement, you have to go in with a strategy. You can't approach the conversation with this makes me feel warm and fuzzy. You have to really approach it from a strategic plan standpoint and say, look, we're going to tackle these pieces here. This is going to save us money. We're going to tackle these pieces here. This is probably going to cost us a little bit more, but we're also going to end up hitting, kind of like what we were saying with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're also going to engage more local suppliers to help us hit some of these, diversity marks or what have you. Go to procurement with a complete strategic thought around what it is you want to implement. I think there'll be better ease than in that conversation. You still might not get everything that you're looking for, but you're really presenting it in sort of like a packaged, thought through, here's how we can make it happen process. And I think that's how we can better engage with that part of our supply chain.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I'll just add that it's not always an easy conversation. It's not always an easy process, but the more that we started bringing sustainability into the conversations with procurement as we were doing it, the more we were able to get them to actually work with us to ask suppliers, what their sustainability policies were, to start to embed it in our RFPs, to start to embed it in our contracts. Because the idea around procurement, of course, is that you want this stuff in contracts and RFPs so that you can start that process early with destinations, with venues, with suppliers, so that it doesn't become just one more thing that gets added on at the end. And we got our procurement department after a lot of conversation to really make it a part of their quarterly business reviews with all of our event suppliers. So there were sustainability questions that they asked every quarter in terms of what they were doing to help Oracle become more sustainable in their events. So I think it's just a conversation. I think to your point, Courtney, bringing them into the strategy piece of it, bringing them into a design thinking process, just being collaborative with them, because I think procurement people, like other parts of every organization, feel isolated. They feel like they are, just out there doing their job of like looking at contracts and trying to get the best price or whatever, and getting them to look at the big picture as well in terms of, to your point, looking at the company's ESG goals or science-based target goals or whatever it may be, environmental goals, is another way of bringing them into the conversation so that they become almost a part of the supply chain and become a part of the overall solution that you're trying to get to.
Yeah. And even now, I don't know how much it's happening, but Paul, with so many corporate types now having a chief sustainability officer or what have you, is that a stakeholder you need to have better involvement in with your, strategic plan around your events? And then how does that person maybe help too from that procurement side, right? It's a whole nother layer, especially at the corporate level, that has really started to take hold, that I think there's better avenues for planners to help engage other stakeholders within the business too.
Yeah, and this is one way I often hear, event planners whether it be within corporate or anywhere else, that, oh, we don't have a seat at the table when we're talking to senior management. Well, this is a way to get a seat at the table. If you've got a chief sustainability officer and can develop a relationship with them, use them as a relationship builder into other organizations, and create a seat at the table for yourself, especially when it comes to talking about sustainability. And again, if you've got a champion within the organization empower them to go build those relationships within the organizations and, and get sustainability and get your event people kind of, into the senior management level.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm seeing another question here, Freddie from SF Environment. How can event producers reduce the amount of free giveaways that are handed out by sponsors, exhibitors? Is there an alternative in this space? So that a little bit gets back to the waste question. I'll let you comment on that first.
I mean, to me, this is one of those, just stop. I'm the person that's like, no, I don't keep the piece of paper. I have 10,000 pens. I don't want another jump drive. Like, I don't need a teddy bear with a logo on it to take home to my child. They're not buying your product. Like, it's one of those mind-blowing things to me. But I think I've also just personally grown up in a space where I don't like having something that doesn't feel useful.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I would go back to is really having good conversation with your stakeholder group around what is it that we need to have happen, right? Especially in the trade show space. What is the goal? What is the objective around what the individual exhibitors are going to be doing and how they're going to engage with the attendees that come? How can we minimize this? How can we write a policy that says, no giveaways allowed? Or how do we develop something around, if you're going to do a giveaway, it has to be related to, something that's a local give back, something that is a sustainably sourced and produced item. How do you write some parameters around those things is where I guess I'd say we start. I'm of course going to zero immediately. I just think that should be, I feel like it should just be the industry rules. Like it should just be zero, but I don't think I'll win when it comes to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, it's another one of those things where, again, looking at the value for the attendees, is there actually a value to giving them some tchotchke or some, giveaway? And if you want to create value, can that giveaway be something that is sustainable, that is sourced locally, that is sourced in a way that it's going to be used and not just left in a hotel room or thrown in the trash or whatever it may be? I agree with you that this is something I had conversations with our exhibit team all the time in terms of like, can we get to zero giveaways? It's a really hard conversation because sponsors want some tangible thing that gets their brand put on an object of some kind. And the conversations that we ended up having was, are you actually creating any value by giving away something with your brand and name on it versus having content delivered at the event that has your brand attached to it, that provides actually more value for attendees than an object or a giveaway? So I think there's a couple of different ways of attacking that. But again, if you have sort of a net zero mentality in your strategy, then giveaways is one of those things that you would look at through that lens and say, if we're going to get to zero waste, we have to stop giving away stuff that's going to go in the trash eventually, or even if people take it home, will they use it? Will they dispose of it properly, or will it just go into the trash? So it's that kind of a conversation in terms of looking at it from the lens of, if we're trying to get to zero waste, which is kind of one of the big goals, if we want to think about, again, that bigger picture of like the industry needs to get to zero waste and carbon neutrality or net zero on carbon, then these are the lenses that we have to use to start to think about these things.
And I spilled that conversation into gifting as well. So being in the corporate space, I did a lot of those incentive type programs. I don't know why, but one time I just said, you know what? I talked with the hotel. I'm like, if people leave some stuff, we had some kind of oddball gifts that I felt like might get left behind. I'm like, can we gather those? Can housekeeping pull those things for us so that get in a car and take it and donate it locally somewhere. This was a client that was gift heavy. I mean, 15 items per person, it was crazy. but none of them were real high value kind of things. The number of items that were left behind was staggering. I mean, absolutely staggering. It was almost impossible for me to figure out what to do with all of those items to keep them out of landfill. And most of them had been trucked in from the US to an international destination. And so I stood there looking at this massive pile thinking, there's a better way to do this because we're spending a lot of money here. And how do we better use that money either in something else entirely for the program or in 3 gifting items that are very high end and feel luxurious and what have you. And it completely changed how that client handled all of their gifting. So
Yeah.
it's a cool place to do an assessment for sure.
Yeah. There's a question specifically for you that kind of relates to this. When seeking event planning and management support to drive greater sustainability at our events, what are the primary attributes we should consider when selecting a vendor, partner, or consultant?
Primary attributes, I think flexibility was, if I would say flexibility is probably the first thing that comes to mind for me. The challenges around sustainability can be really frustrating from the standpoint of you could be in one city and try to implement something and that city has a ton of infrastructure to support it. And then the next year you're somewhere else and it's much harder to get that piece to happen, right? So I think working with suppliers and good partners that have flexibility that can help inform you on maybe what destination specific things you can tackle and you can get done. Maybe someone that comes to the table with an alternative. Well, I don't have a way of helping you recycle those items, but I do have a partner and we can keep them out of recycling and actually repurpose them by utilizing, XYZ, so and so and so and so. So I think that kind of sense of flexibility is really important. I think from a consultant standpoint, I think someone who can really help you strategically digest what's going on. Sustainability is a massive topic. So if you're looking to hire someone to come in and help you, you need someone that can kind of pull the curtains back, help you get directly focused in on what's going to make the most sense for you. You are never going to come out of the gate and implement every sustainability item into your events. It's just never going to happen. And I think most of us get stunned in that moment and we then do nothing because we don't know what to do. So if you're going to hire someone who can really help you dig through those weeds and say, okay, you know what, this makes the most sense. It's going to align with other goals and objectives that you have. Let's start here. And then I think that's the way to kind of get you rolling in terms of a good partner like that.
Yeah, no, great answer. I mean, the only other thing that I might add to that is that, to look for and ask the question of vendors and partners and consultants of what their sustainability policies are and make sure that they kind of align with, the values that you're trying to create for your event or your organization or whatever it may be. Those would, again, that was kind of our conversation with procurement, is trying to get suppliers to answer those questions and have it be a part of the quarterly business review that we did with all of those people.
Yeah.
I see a question. Are you aware of any net zero event venues on the horizon? That's an interesting one.
Ooh. I don't know that I know of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah, same here. I don't know of any on the top of my head, although I guess what I would say is that there are certainly venues that are working towards and have set goals around net zero.
Yeah.
And some of them are, putting solar on their facilities. Some of them are working with their local utilities to have a certain percentage of renewable energy come into the building. Some of them have very strict policies around when you could use air conditioning and their HVAC systems, for example. So I think those are out there. And what I might propose is that we start looking for those kinds of destinations and venues and start actually rewarding them with business. Yeah. Because if we're gonna make the change to renewables, if we're gonna start solving for climate, then we need to start rewarding the people that are actually doing the work. Mm-hmm. And take Moscone Center in San Francisco, for example. They have some solar on their roof. They're very diligent about their energy usage. They measure it. They will give you that data for your sustainability report. You know, and there are others out there. So even some of the venues in Las Vegas are starting, you know, the MGM, for example, has a massive solar
Massive.
farm that they're using. You know, so we should start thinking about how can we work with and how can we even reward some of the venues and some of the destinations that are starting to really look at this from a practical and long-term perspective, and reward them with business. You know, I think if the event industry started setting their own goals around these and started working with other partners that had set those same kinds of goals, you know, we could make a lot more progress than we're making right now.
Yeah, I would agree in that. And engaging with your DMO, if you're trying to look at a venue, I think that engagement with your DMO super early helps with that. It helps you identify more or less how sustainable that destination actually is. Because even if the venue itself isn't as sustainable as you were hoping, there might be enough else supporting there that it also works for you. So I think there's a push there too to work with your DMO more, and also to kind of call out the DMO and say, hey, DMO, start showcasing this in a different way and really start elevating your destination based on what you have going on.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to look at is, you know, some destinations actually have, you know, set goals around, you know, like diversion from landfill, for example. San Francisco, for example, has a goal to get to 75% diversion, I think, by 2025. And so, you know, you could be pushing your venues to look at the destination's goals and saying, how can we make sure that our event matches that goal? Which again gets back to the DMO working with the destinations and working with the venue.
Yeah.
I didn't want to, I don't know that I want to get into this too much today, but I don't know if people are aware of the net zero pledge that is out there that the Joint Meeting Industry Council has proposed. They've got a pretty good playbook going in terms of how you would actually get to net zero from both a carbon and a waste perspective. So it's something for people to Google and kind of take a look at in terms of getting your organizations to potentially pledge to the net zero initiative that's going on.
Agreed. It's great.
Yeah. So I don't know if yeah, thank you, Anna, for throwing that into the chat. Another question that's out there, any success stories about abandoning costly rentals in exchange for fair price purchases paired with donating?
Costly rentals, like I guess like stage sets or exhibitor
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
Nothing is immediately coming to mind. I will say, like, full disclosure, AV production is not a space I've played in a lot in my sustainability career, so that's a little bit less of what I know about. So I don't know if you have one, Paul.
I mean, the only one that I'm kind of aware of that we did a lot of was taking all of our signage and donating it to local arts organizations for reuse, and then thinking about how you would actually upcycle certain materials or repurpose and reuse. I'm not sure that this is necessarily answering the question, but yeah, you know, it's something that, you know, again, I think has to be part of a larger strategy. Like when you're thinking about food, for example, is like, you know, as opposed to food waste, can we donate food? You know, and how do we plan menus so that we don't actually have any food waste?
Right.
And the same could be true of things like we touched on giveaways, you know. Could those giveaways be purchased with the specific intent of donating whatever is left over and finding the right partners for donating those kinds of things?
Yeah.
So
I do know that, like, or at least some of my understanding in the production space is that more of those businesses are moving to a reusable versus one-off.
yeah.
And I even heard recently that a lot of the drape used for pipe and drape, that there's new materials coming on board that are made out of better material, recycled material, things like that. So there's shifts coming in that space too. I think that probably helps. So I would say dig in with your supplier, and if your supplier doesn't know, then you need to find a different supplier.
Yeah. So we've touched on a bunch of big things today. Just there's been a very general conversation. We're gonna dig into very specific topics going forward, but just to kind of close out this particular session, Courtney, I just wanted to get your perspective on kind of what are the biggest things that we can do to reduce carbon emissions and waste that leads to carbon emissions? What are the big trends that you think are coming kind of around the corner or right on the horizon?
Yeah, I think it's really focusing on that material waste at the moment, and sort of understanding that you're going to have the carbon footprint of flights for the moment, and that there's bigger things happening to try to resolve that, and that you can look at how you pick destinations to reduce flight miles and things like that, but that then sort of stop and move into a space where you have this control. I mean, the conversations around how do I plan a zero waste event have grown exponentially. And what they're really talking about are those material items. So whether that's food and beverage, whether that's water bottles, or your plastic footprint, what you're doing about signage, how you're handling your audiovisual and stage sets, all of those things matter. And I think educating yourself there and getting hyper focused there and really drive to zero. You have a lot of control in that space. Really drive hard to zero, to get yourself to a place where you're mitigating landfill and a lot of carbon in the process.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just mention a few that have been on my mind, and that you'll see me start to write about. I think the top three that I would say is flying less. I think that we fly way too much. We go to too many events potentially. I know in person is massively important to people, but virtual events sometimes do the job for us. And we should really be thinking about, do we need to fly as much as we fly? Could we be doing more regional events and more local events, and tying those audiences together in some digital kind of way? I think the other thing that we kind of touched on is using renewable energy and starting to reward destinations and venues that are using renewable energy in more creative kinds of ways. And then the other one that I would say is starting to really dig into plant-based and default veg menu planning. The amount of carbon that gets created from meat, for example, is something that we can start to really look at. I know these are all sort of tough ones for the event industry to kind of get their heads wrapped around, but they're not new. People have been doing them for a while. I'm aware of at least 2 conferences that have gone completely meatless. And so it certainly is possible. And it gets back again to working with your attendees on what their values are and looking what your own values are. And then the last one that I would mention that I think is very interesting that I touched on earlier is this idea of creating sustainability spaces within your events, giving people, your attendees, the opportunity to talk about sustainability, to talk about climate change, especially as we go through this generational change. I just saw some interesting data the other day that the average age of attendees is really starting to trend down. We're starting to see much more millennials and Gen Z attending our events. And so these are the folks that are going to want to have these conversations. So again, thank you so much, Courtney, for coming and having this conversation today. Is there a last word that you want to throw in?
I have one more. I'm sorry. If I can get really inspirational or aspirational is the word, aspirational for the moment, I would love to see a shift in particular in the incentive market. And because that's typically luxury, there's a lot of waste that goes on there because of what kinds of things people are trying to hit. What if we were to move those and create these really socially impactful, high-end experiences where you're going somewhere and having such a big impact? The entire experience is around how you're creating an impact at the destination where you're going. I mean, I think I've been wanting to aspire to that for a very long time, and I would love to see us start to change the narrative around what that incentive type of trip looks like.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. All right. So thank you, Courtney, for coming in and talking with us today. Loved the conversation. So keep an eye out for the next set of series of Patio Perspectives, where we're going to start to dive into some of these topics that we talked about today, like line less, like default veg and plant-based menus, like renewable energy, like waste. So we're going to dive into some of these conversations in much more detail than we did today. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Anna. Thank you all for attending so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Paul and Courtney. That was really, really incredible. I really was hanging on every word, and there are so many great takeaways. So, and thanks everybody who participated with questions and adding comments in the chat. That really adds to the discussion, and I really appreciate the participation there too. So, I encourage you all to take the pledge that that Paul mentioned. If you need the link again, we'll have that on the website. I believe it is already on the website. I'll fact check that later. We will post the recording of this. There was so much information. So if you want to share it with your team or with your colleagues, we really encourage you spreading this around so that we can get as many people learning these things as we can and sharing information. We have some incredible events coming up. So the Patio Perspective series will continue. Stay tuned for more details and dates and topics. Again, we're always open to topic ideas, so please feel free to email us and or put it in the chat and let us know. But we also have a really exciting another VIP behind the scenes sneak peek. So for those of you who were able to join us for the GDC VIP behind the scenes, you know how amazing that was. Thanks to Workday, they are going to host a VIP behind the scenes sustainability tour of Workday Rising in September. So stay tuned for those details and for more events to come. And I have to ask, if you are really interested, we are always looking for volunteers. We can use committee members. So shameless plug for getting involved in a deeper way. Feel free to email us and or reach out to me, however you like, and we'll get you involved. We'd love more people to get involved with SFSE. So on that note, another very, very warm thank you. I wish we could hear applause. So I'll just do it for everybody. Thank you, Courtney and Paul, and we'll see you next time.